Good evening, everyone. I would like to call to order the November 8th, 2022 Planning and Zoning Meeting. Could we do roll call, please?
Misty?
Here.
Sarah? Here. Al?
Here.
Aaron? Bob?
Here.
Jeremy?
Here.
Josh? Courtney? And Lynn.
Okay, so next is the agenda approval. I'm looking for someone to approve the November 2022 Planning and Zoning Meeting agenda.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Right. Next is minutes approval. Approval of October's meeting minutes.
Make a motion to approve October's meeting minutes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next on the agenda is public comment. This would be for any item that is not on tonight's agenda. Do we have any comments that are not related to the agenda? All right. Next is new business. Item A, consider recommendation on request for approval of an amendment to Chapter 167 titled Sign Code.
And really quick, I'll introduce Chris Shires. Most of you probably remember him when he did our zoning code update. He's also been helping us with our sign code update. So this is kind of the second part of our three-part updating of our codes. Next one will be subdivision, but Chris has been working with us on this one and ready to present it to the Planning and Zoning Commission tonight. So I'll hand it off to Chris and let him present it.
All right. Chair, Commission, Charlie, thank you so very much for having me back. We're here to talk about updating your sign code. There's a lot of pictures in the presentation, and I'm gonna try to make this a little bit entertaining because we are talking about sign code, which it's hard to get excited sometimes. But this is pretty important. And so I'm gonna go through just a little bit on sign code 101. There's been changes in case law that frankly is really pushing us needing to update your code, how we're allowed to legally regulate signage, and then there's some quality standards that I'm going to talk through a couple options as we review the actual draft. And I'm going to go through kind of the big parts because obviously it's a 24-page document. And I'd say if you have a question as I'm going through, please feel free to interrupt me or after I'm done with the presentation, and I'll try to go quickly knowing you have a lot on the agenda. Tell me to turn to a certain page and we can talk about it in more detail. So first, I want to talk about sign types, just so we're all kind of on the same page. Big categories. We have commercial signs. This is where we're trying to advertise or sell or do something, and then everything else. And that we kind of think of as either as free speech or non-commercial signs, political issue signs. So you're not really trying to sell anything other than maybe a candidate or a political cause or an ideology. And then we have on-premise and off-premise. And I have pictures to back up what those mean, as well as temporary and permanent signage. And so let's talk about on-premise and off-premise because your code is proposing to regulate those or continue to regulate those like you do today. And so in this example, that Wendy's signs, it's advertising the Wendy's business that's on-site, so it is on-premise signage versus what we think of as a billboard advertising McDonald's that's not in that vacant field, that's off-premise. And so case law says we can still make a differentiation between regulating on-premise versus off-premise signage. There's some reasons why that matters over time. And then again, more examples of on-premise and off-premise, and this is the hardest one for us to sometimes deal with. That owner having a for sale sign in the front yard, that's on-premise. The realtor sticking aside a sign out in the right-of-way somewhere or out off-premise saying all of our open houses are this way, those are considered off-premise signs. And we do make some differentiations in the code. And those are just for example. Then we have signs that are permanent and signs that are temporary. So kind of like it sounds, these are all pictures of temporary signs. These have kind of a shorter shelf life. They're not necessarily as permanently installed. They're set upon the ground. They're attached to a building, they're fabric, things like that. And there's all different types, and we'll go into that a little more detail. Air activated graphics, balloon signs, flags, mobile signs. Permanent signs, just kind of like it sounds, there's all different sign types, and so in the document, we actually created some new graphics to try to explain what we mean. So even the less savvy user, somebody who doesn't deal with sign codes all day long, might have a little help on understanding. So we have ground signs, also known as freestanding signs. There's different types of those. We have ones that are pylon or pole signs, and then ones we consider monument or monolithic signs. And then other types of signs called affixed to a building signs. And there's examples of roof signs, window signs, projecting signs, canopy signs. And then there's even the sign forms and all the different categories they can fall into. And that's really how the sign is constructed. Is it a panel sign, individual letter sign? Is it an electronic sign? Things like that. One thing we do define in the code is, this is kind of a quality thing, is do we want to prohibit or otherwise regulate how we mount signs on buildings? And in this case, these are all pictures of signs mounted on what we call raceways. Sometimes there are practical reasons why you really do need to mount a sign onto a raceway. Sometimes we consider that's an aesthetic issue. Do we want to move away from those? They tend to be places where birds make nests, or sometimes has just a less of a higher quality appearance. But there are some practical difficulties in mounting signs onto a building. And so in our code, we've talked about some allowances for a uniform sign backer, such as that eye care sign, or what we call a halo cut raceway. And that's the example of the merchant sign, or even that total eye care sign, where the backer is actually contoured the basic shapes of the sign. All right. And then changeable copy signs, which falls two different categories. We have mechanical changeable copy. So that's that Casey's sign, those letters in black on the yellow face. Those can be manually changed. That's where you're going out there and changing the numbers. Versus the other Casey's sign, that's a digital sign. So it's electronically changed, those sign numbers. And then there's all the whole world of electronic signs, now known as EMCs, electronic message centers, have advanced in technology and dropped quite a bit in price. And so now you can do full graphics. You could watch a TV show on one. Really, the sky's the limit with where they're at today in technology. And then finally, those are all commercial signs. We want to talk about non-commercial signs, political issue, free speech, ideology signs, just kind of like you might think. And hey, I think today's a great time to talk about those. Okay, so why are we updating the sign code? This is a part of that bigger update to your zoning code regulations in general. We're proposing that the sign code would be under your zoning authority, as you're allowed to do under how you've been granted those authorities from state law, from the state code. We want to update some of the language that's very outdated. We need to change how we regulate signs. One of the big things we can't do is give different categories of signs based on what they say or what they're used for. We have to treat a for sale sign the same as a sign that says something of a permanent message. And then there's other things that we want to make sure we're getting that quality of sign we want. And maybe even in this case, want to make sure that we're allowing businesses to best advertise themselves. And so in this, we are actually increasing the amount of wall area and kind of simplifying the process for building wall mounted signs so that our businesses can be successful. Okay, so last time I was here to see you, we went through sections 1 through 9 in your new zoning code. So we're adding this new sign code right to the very end under the overall zoning code, so in section 10. And I won't read all of these, but there's 23 really important sections within the sign code, but I want to focus on really the four primary areas for our point of discussion. Not that these other ones are not important, but signs that we're outright prohibiting or greatly restricting, the sign types, general sign regulations, and then the all-important design standards. And so if you don't remember anything else, really those are the big kind of 4 categories. I might throw in sign definitions. Number 3, do need to define terms, especially as technology changes. The sign code may be one of those codes, like we've talked in the past about periodic adjustments and update your zoning code. The sign code may be one of those that every so many years, something's going to come along, an update or adjustment. Change in case law, a new sign technology, or frankly, preference changes. You start to get used to a certain type of sign and think, oh, that's okay, we might want to permit more of those. So some of the signs types, and most of these are temporary, but some of the sign types we're proposing that are prohibited are, the main ones are listed here. So air activated graphics, that's that happy dancing guy that you often see out in front of a car dealership. And so these are all proposals. Obviously, this is something for the commission and the council to tell us what you want in or out of this. Other signs that are animated, balloon signs, banner signs as a permanent sign type. Temporary is okay. Billboards, because we classify those as off-premise. Flashing, glaring lights, moving lights, many of these are already prohibited in your code today. Off-premise sign, because that's just like we talked about with a billboard, except as a temporary sign. And then pole signs, kind of like the chicken one at the bottom there that's purple. Portable signs, such as on a trailer. Projected image, that's a new thing in the technology. I think just like you have a projector displaying a movie, very easy to now do that with the technology, very affordable. You could have an animated graphic sign on the side of a building almost overnight. Other portable signs, roof signs, and signs in our right-of-way, except for where we've specifically said it's okay. And mainly it's specifically for the downtown area. Then we talk about different sign types. And so instead of trying to restrict all these signs, we also talk about what are permitted sign types to try to have not too many different categories. So we have the permanent signs, building signs, signs on buildings, ground signs, freestanding signs. Directional signs, it's an important sign type that we want to allow for. Signs for drive-throughs, ATMs, and then the all-important flags. We're not trying to say no, it's trying to put some parameters in place to help meet some of the aesthetic needs, kind of reduce maybe the visual clutter. Temporary signs, we do have a lot of different sign types, but again, it's anything that could be a freestanding sign, signs on sidewalks, and talk about that in the downtown. Blade signs and flag signs, those are basically they're very affordable now, where you can have your store logo or sale sign hung up on a flag itself. Other types of banners attached to walls, windows, and signs even covering existing permanent signs that are maybe the business has changed or you're updating your logo and you need one temporarily. Okay, I realize now looking at that how small that print is on the screen. So in the sign regulation section, to try to make our lives a little bit easier, we put the basic standards into a matrix. And so instead of trying to, or into a table, so instead of trying to read through each section of the sign code to see what's allowed, this is a little more of a one-stop shop. I just want to kind of walk through kind of the basics of it. So there's the first section on building signs, and they're broken down then by zoning district. So we're allowed to regulate signage based on what zoning district it's in. And so for our ag and residential districts, really restrictive. We're talking just one sign per building, and 48 square feet. But frankly, it's generally businesses or things, they're not businesses as readily happening in a residential district, of course. They're not needing a large amount of signage, say that a retail business does. Then in our commercial and in our industrial districts, so C through M, that's where we're being more generous and talking about 10% of the building wall area can be signage. With some limitations in the downtown district, basing that more on story by each floor as that 10% cap. We do talk about doing those projecting signs, so signs sticking out from the wall face, again in your downtown, very common and typical. Those would be the ones that could overhang into the right-of-way with a right-of-way agreement from the city, a right-of-way encroachment agreement approved by the city. And then we have some other rules and regulations when we get into the design standards. So this is both consistent with your current code today, but a little more generous on the volume of wall signage, really pushing. We're going to up that quality standard for the signs. We want higher quality signs, but we want to allow more of that on the wall surface and window surface and awnings and canopies. Any questions on that one before I click through? Okay. I'm trying to make this entertaining and I don't know how to do this. Ground signs. So these are also really important to businesses. So just like in the previous category, over across the top of the table, we have all the different zoning districts. And so those residential districts A through R are really different than the commercial and industrial districts C through M. For ground signs, we talk about just one per building that's facing a street. Then, I'm sorry, let me flip my own page so I can read my own parts here. We're talking about one again per building facing a street, but for our residential subdivisions, you always have that pressure to allow them to have that entry monument signs, but we got to treat all sign types the same. So let's just go ahead and say in this, and this is what the code says, is those subdivisions can have what we kind of think is the typical desire for entry monument signs on either side. We then restrict the height, square footage, width, placement, and set some setbacks. If you flip over to the next column for all the commercial and industrial districts, it's a little more generous. We talk about one for each lot, one ground sign for each street frontage lot. But as you have a really, really wide lot, something beyond 500 feet, you start to get to have an extra sign. And then we have allow a lot taller sign, which is typical and is consistent with your current code. And then more square footage. As the sign is taller, it does need to be bigger for that legibility. The setback is really a ratio of its height. The taller the sign, the farther back from the roadway.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
Under residential, would say a stone column, 6 feet high, declaring this is Maplewood residential, is that a sign?
Yes.
So it would be permitted here.
Yes. Because we're doing that all the time now, so why don't we just make it permitted? What we used to do in the code is say, you can do a subdivision entrance sign. Well, we can't call it necessarily a subdivision entrance sign. We have to have other parameters to make it more generic.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Anything else on ground signs? All right, let's keep running through the special category. Now, obviously we have drive-through restaurants and they kind of have special needs. So here we're saying where we allow a drive-through restaurant for the drive-through, and we're not saying what the signs have to say, but we're allowing them. And there's some very specific rules kind of based on what we see as kind of the typical drive-through standard, but still some kind of pullback that they can't quite go crazy and use this against us. And then on ATMs, that's another one we kind of always deal with. How do we, you got to have a couple of signs in an ATM, so we just kind of call it out. All right. Let's go on to the last for this little section, corporate flags. And so this is always a point of contention. So what your ordinance is proposing is we're not trying to regulate what we call government flags. That's the US flag, state flag. Frankly, the city of Indianola, if you guys want to create a flag, your flag, it can be other governmental flags from other nations. That's something allowed at the federal level on how you're supposed to fly those. We're not trying to regulate those. What we're talking about is the corporate flags. Sometimes they can actually become another way to do advertisement. So we're trying to keep not regulating speech or content or type, but instead regulating type. And so there's some rules saying how tall, how big, flying them, say, with a governmental flag so that there's a purpose and intent behind it. But I want to make sure it's clear in this, we're not regulating US, state, frankly, local government flags. And that's kind of the easiest thing to do. That means Perkins can do the kind of the humongous big Perkins flag as usual, but it's sometimes a safer path instead of trying to regulate a US flag. All right, any questions on that? Okay, now the fun world of temporary signs. This is normally where we have the most pain when we're updating our sign code, because we used to do a lot of special classes for temporary signs. In this case, we're making it very flat, a little bit generous, and that frankly, property owners are going to have to pick and choose on their temporary commercial signs. We can't differentiate between a sign saying there's a sale on for milk versus this property is for sale or rent. Often we think, oh, you can always have a for sale or rent sign up, but we only want you to have a limited number of signs saying milk for sale here at Walgreens. And with the case law, we can't make a differentiation like that. So our suggestion is just be a little bit generous with that temporary sign and don't have a permit process. Because then that's just more work for everybody involved. So when we look at that matrix, the ag and residential districts were kind of more restrictive. Think of it, this is your for sale sign or your garage sign and the typical size. But then on the commercial side, you get a little more generous. So you get one of these temporary signs for each frontage and for each building or individual business, because you have a multi-tenant center and each individual building or center might have to be leased on its own or for sale on its own. And by default, might want to advertise something on its own. And then we also talk about having because we see them all the time, a sidewalk sign, an A-frame type sign that's out in front of the business while its business hours are open. That's just something, in fact, this consultant's recommending, because when I used to enforce sign code, that was the kind of the pressure we'd feel all the time. I really need to be able to advertise that this great thing's going on in my business. Well, if we can kind of have some overall parameters on it, that it's not up all the time, maybe that would be acceptable. And then some limitations on size, height, and setback from property lines. So before I move on from this temporary sign section, that's sometimes a hard one to deal with. The thought is we need to allow the real estate signs, and by default, we're allowing really some of the special event advertising for commercial businesses. This is really where it comes to play.
Chris, is there a time limit or term limit for the definition of a temporary sign?
Yeah, so there's both. Bob, that's a good question. So there's both a definition in how it's affixed and how it's constructed, but we do have a 6-month time limit. And this is more of, because we're not going to do a permit process. We have this set up that at any point, city staff, the zoning administrator could drive to a property upon a complaint and just basically count signs and say, oh, you are meeting the temporary sign limit. You don't have too many temporary signs. Now, we do have the time limit, which is a little harder because at some point you'd have to document, hey, this sign is in place today, but it's 6 months. And it's really more of a ratty sign provision. So you can have a temporary sign up perpetually. You have to replace that sign 6 months so it doesn't get ratty. Really, the thought behind that is you may not be actually monitoring that the sign is being torn down and replaced with a new one. But when you have a ratty sign, a sign that is in disrepair, you have a pretty darn good excuse to say, that's been there longer than 6 months. Take it down, go buy another piece of plywood and build your new sign. Yeah. I did invent that. I hope it was kind of a creative thought. And again, it comes from the guy who used to have to regulate sign codes. Okay, then the last one, and this is really timely for today. This is the free speech political issue, save the whales, vote for me kind of signage. Really, in this case, we're saying there's not a limit on the number. There's a limit on how big each sign is, setback, and where it can be. Sometimes we wish that at the state level, there are more restrictions on campaign signs. There are not. There's not a time frame. There's regulations deal more with who's regulation of donors, who can actually have political signs on their properties, who's paying for them, are you disclosing who's paying for them? Other than that, there's not the time limits in actual place at the state level. They don't have limitations on sizes, all that. And so in our thought is, let's have some limits on sizes of individual signs. So on the residential properties, a little bit smaller, typical. On the commercial properties, bigger. But the number limiting, time frame, 6 months. But of course, you could tear it down and then put it back up in 6 months, just because this is one of those real sensitive issues. And so this is kind of a community by community decision to make, because when I've done this in other communities, they put a limit and they said no more than 4. Well, the hard part is you might be supporting more than 4 different candidates. I did drive by one and they didn't have a duplicate for any one candidate, but there were like 8 different political signs out there. Now, the big thing is not in the right of way, private property only. Any questions on that in particular? Okay, now let's get into those design standards and based on all those, and even for lesser on the temporary, it's really on the permanent signs. So for the building wall signs, here's the new thought. What if we move away from the panel signs, the cabinet signs? So the little conductor's toy store, that'd be a panel sign or a cabinet sign. Whereas the AT&T sports clip, not the haircut sign so much in the merchants, those are all examples of individual channelized letter or individual letter signs, and there's a lot of different types. Moving away from painted signs, exposed neon, exposed light bulb, doing those raceway backers, unless it's the halo style that I talked about earlier. And then if you're in a residential district that they're not internally lit, they could be uplit, but they're not internally lit, try to reduce that, maybe that impact on say a neighboring single family house. This is a bit of a deviation from the current code. Now, the one caveat to this, if you look at that AT&T sign, and I wish it was a little bigger, that AT&T logo, think of it as that was Starbucks' little logo. It'd be really hard to replicate with individual cut pieces. So there is a provision in the code that individual symbols, logos, elements, sign elements can be, in essence, made out of a panel. There's a size limit. That is not 100% unique. There's other cities that do that same thing. So something to think about. And this has to do with sign quality. Some standards on projecting signs. Again, these would be for your downtown. A lot of it has to do with clearance, head height, obstruction. These I would definitely promote. These help legibility, readability, helping you find businesses in the downtown. And then the last one is ground signs. Big change here. Should we move away from doing pole signs and only do monument signs, ground monument signs that are generally, the top is about as wide as the base, and there's some parameters in there to define that. And again, moving away from cabinets, panels, except you could still do an individual logo graphic as a small button panel type sign. And then some parameters on those electronic message centers, and I'll show another, some text on that here in a second. So just like in this hospital sign, they have that electronic message, you have a lot of them today. Maybe do we want to add some new parameters on what they look like and how they're used? And so with that, there's a couple of different ways you can look at this. You could have no rules, bunch of rules, or something in between. So I'm suggesting something kind of in between. This would be moving forward. So any new sign, do you want to prohibit the animated graphics, the full video motion? It can be an aesthetic issue, be somewhat distracting or irritating if you're a nearby resident or property owner. Businesses do love them because they do attract attention. So there's that balance. However, you can do these full graphic pictures. What we're proposing is a 30-second dwell time. So meaning that picture can't change, but every 30 seconds. And the technology totally allows this, definitely on the newer signs. And so the question is 30 too long or not long enough? I've seen it as low as 4 seconds, 2 seconds, as high as an hour. So you could do somewhere in between, really thinking this is kind of an aesthetic consideration. It is important now to allow what we call these EMCs, electronic message center signs, such as that Casey's example, because that's really what they're doing so they can change their fuel price signs, especially if they're up high. They're allowed to do a little better messaging to their customers. And then some light limitations are super important. So even if you allow full animated graphics, we definitely want to do some light limitations. This 5,000 candelas with this nit scale measurement, and then the kind of the nighttime and the daytime, it's a pretty standard, pretty decent standard common standard. Sometimes that'll be a higher number or a lower number, a little brighter, a little darker. But we do want it to adjust based. Daytime, that sign needs to be a lot lighter. Nighttime, it needs to be a lot darker, less illuminated. And then some limitations on the total square feet, but with some flexibility to allow them to break that up into separate individual electronic message centers, mainly for those who might be using them as a fuel price sign. Okay, that was a lot to throw at you. Any questions on that?
Do you have any experience with limiting the hours? For example, if it's a business that's open from 8 to 8, why does their electronic sign need to be on at 2 o'clock in the morning?
Yeah.
Especially if they're near residential.
So this is in a residential district. We're already saying no. But back to your comment on
Well,
time of
adjacent
operation,
to a
could be
residential.
close. I have seen that. I can think of one community that does have that in their regulations. Electronic signs have to be shut off when the business is closed, off business hours. It really becomes more of an enforcement issue. As much as there's 24 pages of regulations in here, my goal was not to make this super hard for your staff. And so you sure could. That could be something we write into the code. It just really becomes more of an enforcement issue. One more thing to kind of watch out for.
Your question for you, obviously I understand any new sign has to follow these standards, but what if you have an existing sign, changes ownership, they want to change the sign, are they required to follow that? The new ordinance, or can they, let's say it's a pole mounted sign
Yeah.
and it's there and now a new owner wants to change the context of the sign, but wants to keep the pole sign. I mean, just trying to understand some examples of how an existing, how things get grandfathered in, or what are we thinking there?
And that's a great comment to bring up because I did not have that in the presentation. So let me walk through that. You can always write something slightly different, but in general, an existing legally permitted sign is grandfathered. And there's a certain amount of maintenance and replacement you could do. So if you have an existing pole sign, you need to change light bulbs, you sure can. If somebody moves out and another person moves in, they can keep the sign. If they want to change the sign face itself to either update it, refresh it, or change who's being advertised, they can do that. If the sign gets hit by a car, knocked down, it's done. They lost their grandfather. Hit by a tornado, it's done. If they need to do substantial repair, such as take this whole thing down, rebuild the cabinet, replace the pole, they've lost their grandfathering status. So it's replacing of the face generally, regular maintenance generally, anything beyond that, losing the grandfather. Now back to even regulating the electronic message centers. Now here will be the problem. If you've got an existing electronic message center that say has a full animated graphics going on right now, which I did see one way in as I was thinking about it, I'd say they're grandfathered. Now, if they stop using it for the term within our code, talking about grandfathered status, they'd lose that ability. If they changed it out to a new electronic message center, if they upgraded their technology, they'd lose that status. And so you'll probably have some businesses that'll try to be really, really careful with that. As often we do see that when we go to a no pole sign type of ordinance. But over time, they'll go away, and as they want a fresh new sign, as they change their site, reconstruct something. Okay. And this would not apply, so temporary signs are temporary. And so really anybody that had let's say you had a temporary sign permit or a temporary sign, at a certain point, those would have to actually come into compliance. It's really the permanent signs that get the grandfathering status. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about downtown. We're treating them a little bit special. We talked about the projecting sign. They're the one group that gets to have them. That is typical, that is normal for a downtown area because the buildings are pushed out to the street right away. They don't have room for a ground monument sign. And if they did a projecting sign so we can read them as we walk or drive down the street, it does need to be in the right of way generally. Now, so the thought is, can we allow them, just like we're doing our other commercial businesses, these temporary, only while the business is open, little sandwich boards, A-frame or T-type signs in the sidewalk, as long as they are not obstructing pedestrians. And typically we think of that as we still have a 5-foot path to get around them. Some spots it might be a little tight. Most of them should be able to do that. Okay, that was way too much to go through, right? Is there anything in particular in this entire draft you want me to go through again, review, or any comments or questions you have for me?
I have one question, Chris.
Excuse me, go ahead.
I just in general, as you've rolled these out, or been a part of these in other communities, have you heard back as far as like feedback from, let's say, from the developers that are working in those communities? You had mentioned like some signs are, they've come down in price and those sorts of things. I guess I'd be interested to hear just if you've had feedback when you rolled these out from the development community, if they've had any complaints or if this is something they embraced.
Yeah, that's a great question. So if the way I heard it is, what has kind of been the issues as we've rolled these out? Where have been the complaints or the concerns? Really, where the biggest push right now is the electronic message centers, those electronic signs. The price is coming down, the technology is getting better, more folks are wanting to have those. So that's been kind of a big deal. And they're wanting the full animated graphics, and they're wanting to be much, much larger, in fact, to be their entire sign face. There's even organizations that like to install them where they'll give the business the top part of the sign, and then they use the bottom sign to do off-premise advertising as a billboard as a way to actually fund the sign. That's been kind of a push. The other thing is a little bit of pushback on really restricting those smooth face or those panel cabinet signs, just because those are very cost effective. They're very cheap. And so there sometimes a little bit of pushback is, oh, that's really expensive. Now, the ones that have them existing today, they can keep changing out those faces as they have a new customer or new client or a new brand. So it's really ones going forward. So sometimes that's the other complaint. The raceway is another issue typically, and that's why I like kind of the solution of, well, you can do a sign backer or a halo cut raceway. So those are kind of the three big ones. The other one, if you're going to be more restrictive on temporary signage or kind of those non-commercial temporary signs, that's the other one we kind of learn the lesson on.
Definitely a step in the right direction. We're kind of getting ourselves up to speed with other communities around the Des Moines area.
Should we consider, this is for other commission members, should we consider something about signs, electronic signs when they're not in use, about being shut off? I've had complaints about one that was all night. It's in a residential area. And neighbors across the street saying, why does that sign have to be on all night long? Why at, 10:30 or 11 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning is that sign on when the business is or facility is closed?
I think it would depend, to me, it would depend on the zoning, or the exposure in the area, because like on highway corridors, part of the value is in the fact that there is that exposure constantly.
This was not a highway corridor.
Right.
That's where I'm thinking is not where they're on a highway corridor or downtown.
Do we have enforcement for like what would be considered like nuisance lighting associated with that?
Ooh, that would be a hard one.
Yeah, that's
If the sign was legally permitted and
Christmas
installed,
lights.
it'd be hard to now do a nuisance enforcement on it. That might be something they'd have to privately go after as like detrimental to their health or quality of life. I think it'd be a hard one for the city to do.
I think then you come back to what you have that slide coming up. Like again, by limiting the brightness. Again, I guess the duration. I don't necessarily want to tell every business, they only have to have their site on, or their sign on during office hours for one sign in particular. That's like an issue.
one would be grandfathered, so.
Huh?
We can talk afterwards.
From a technology perspective, like, and let's say you have an older sign, like, is there even a shut off necessarily on all of them?
So depending on the sign type, only because I know this from a job I had in high school, the short answer is yes, that you can have a sign shut off, any sign. Now, this would still apply to going forward, so new signs going forward. So I think that no matter what the sign type, you sure could. And so if you wanted to say electronic message centers within X feet of any existing residential property have to be shut off when the business hours are off, I think you sure could do that. Funny enough, I mean, it's literally, sometimes it's a switch on a timer, at least for the more static signs.
So maybe we say it by zones. Like if we look at our A1, R1, R2, R3, and R4 or something along those lines.
They're not allowed there.
Right.
Yeah,
So
so
they're
you're,
already
you're
not
thinking
allowed.
like if it was adjacent to one
Right.
of those zoning districts. Yeah.
And what I might look at, if you wanted me to write something, if that was what you asked us to do, is you could say that are, adjacent to or within, and I might say 120 feet, because that would be like a right-of-way distance, their max right-of-way, of a existing existing residentially zoned property. Now, the question is, how about developed property? Because you have a couple of non-conforming, like a house on a commercial property. I know, it gets tough, right? This is why zoning codes get this thick.
Or if you have a church in a residential area and they have an electronic sign.
And by what we're proposing here is they could have their standard bulletin sign, but they could not have a electronic sign if they're zoned, say, C3 or R3, in a residential district. Because we can talk about zoning district, can't say you get this kind of sign, but you don't. So,
But the existing ones would continue to exist
and they'd be grandfathered.
until somebody runs into it and plows it over.
I'm not suggesting that.
Late at night, things happen.
I'm not suggesting that at all. It seems wrong. It's not an approved code
Question
enforcement
about-
technique.
About pole signs. I'm a little confused. Are they in or out?
So
They're out.
we're proposing that they'd be out. And you have plenty of existing ones that would be grandfathered. I get all the way back to my pole signs. Well, I just clicked totally past it, but you know what the difference is? That they would be, going forward, no new pole signs. They could be tall monument signs, what we have there, 25-foot tall with a pretty, 150 square foot sign face area. So that's a pretty good size sign. So think, what do you see in some of your neighboring communities that have restricted pole signs? That is much more common. We're definitely into that, pushing towards ground monument versus pole sign.
It's everywhere.
What's the process from here? If we were to recommend this to the city council, what happens?
Goes to city, yeah.
One time
No,
or three
it's-
times?
It's a ordinance, so it'd have 3 readings. So in the schedule that we've laid out would take this to the council 21st, with, it's 21st.
The 21st.
Okay.
Sorry,
The,
I'm wrong.
yeah.
Okay.
It's 20, I can double check that. Cause I'm not 100% sure. I'm almost positive we did it on the 21st. We can talk if we need to switch that, but, nonetheless, our intention was we were trying to kind of aim for a effective date of January 1.
We have a meeting before the hearing, right? Well, we won't.
We'll have our December.
Not good. I'm pretty sure we set the hearing for the 21st.
Yeah, but
November.
we'll
We'll have our December
That's what I'm saying.
No, this is November 21st.
We're talking about, we're gonna have a December meeting, P and Z will before that.
Not before the hearing, before final adoption, yes.
Oh,
Yes,
okay,
yes.
sorry.
But that's not to say, I mean, again, we are asking for a recommendation from the commission tonight. If you do not provide that recommendation, and that's fine if you don't, if you want more information or you want to deliberate this longer, that's perfectly okay. We would just cancel that hearing that we have scheduled with council and then delay implementation. And that's fine. That's completely up to this group.
Okay, question for you. What are the hot spots you anticipate? What are the landmines here?
100%. So the EMC, and that's gonna come up in, you know, if we do put time limitations on that and talking about how often those messages get changed out, I think that's going to be something. The good thing is I don't think we have too many electronic message centers in town currently. So I think anything new just has to conform to new regulations. I guess what I foresee being the biggest issue is gonna be pole signs. And I mean, there's still new businesses going in that still want to put pole signs in. They're relatively cheap, you know, easy to do. Our code still allows them. I think by pulling that away, that's gonna be one contentious item. At the same time, from an aesthetic standpoint, there's signs that look a lot better than pole signs. I'll give you my opinion. I think pole signs are ugly. But we as a community, I mean, we've upped our facade standards on all our new buildings. Now we're having these nice new buildings and still allowing a pole sign in front. It just doesn't match in my opinion, so.
How do you handle, I'll call it multiple retails in one building, right?
Yeah.
And one's existing, but the next one over is empty and they're gonna start in January. Their signs will be different, right? The one will be grandfathered in and right next door, they won't be able to use those same standards.
But I would say, and I'll just really quick, but I would say again, on the building signs, we're not really changing too much to what we allow now. So I think to the naked eye, you're probably not gonna see too much of a difference now. Some of the constructability of the sign might be a little bit different, and you know, if you're reviewing a sign permit, looking at some of those particulars, there could be some differences there, but I think to the naked eye, you're probably not gonna notice too much of a difference.
Yeah, especially on the wall signs. I think that, back to Charlie's point, it's definitely the freestanding, the pole signs will be the big issue. There are only so many of these like panel signs.
Yeah,
on
and
buildings.
that's-
You don't have that many of them right now.
And I think that's what I was gonna point out too, is, you know, we do have, I think, some commercial strip centers where they use panel signs. That could be a thing where you have a panel sign and then, you know, the next sign can't be a panel sign, so that could be a thing. Hopefully over time that kind of works itself out though.
So if we, I'm not saying we do, but if we wanted to address the time of electronic signs in certain areas, would that be a recommendation to the council, or would it be change here and then come back here for?
I mean, again, that's up to the commission, but you can 100% recommend that change go in. We'll make the change at the staff level and take that change to the council. And the other thing I would say on that too, and just kind of as the discussion was taking place, I don't know from an enforcement standpoint, maybe putting the time limitation to say, you know, when you're not open, sign goes off. That could get a little difficult. I'm kind of thinking maybe we treat it similar to what we do with the noise ordinance and say between this time and this time, you just can't have it on. So like between 10 and 6 or something like that, 10 PM to 6 AM. It has to be off.
Be a lot easier to regulate.
Seems to me that would be easier to enforce as well. Plus, if the true intent is at night, they become a little bit more of a nuisance. Night's consistent, so.
Could we require they just are static during that time?
To be fair, to kind of get back to what I'm guessing is the complaint, I think a little bit of the motion, the flashing motion of an electronic sign is an issue, but I could also see that just in general, the brightness. I think with the 30-second, well, yeah, that could be irritating too. My thought is to keep it as simple as possible, and so, you know, I'd say that if we want to say within proximity, you know, either next to or within 100, and I'd pick a right-of-way number, so 120 foot wide of a residentially zoned or developed property, the sign has to be off between the hours of, what do you say, 6 PM and?
I
or-
put 10 PM to 6 AM. I threw that out there pretty arbitrarily, so that's.
That might be kind of an easy way to just, that way you don't have to sit there and, well, yeah, our business really was open. It's, nope, I can look at a clock and see that you're in violation or not.
That would cover kind of normal sleep time or the bulk of folks' sleep time. You know?
Those who sleep during the day aren't gonna really be affected by it. But to Misty's point too, if it's just static at that point, it could be acceptable because, you know,
It's not any brighter than a street light. It's out
In
there.
some ways, it's less infringing on their rights.
Yeah. Gas stations are open past 10. You wanna know how much
Right,
gas
make that-
costs when you're pulling in?
But they're in a commercial area, so.
if it was within 120 feet of a residential
There's
area,
a lot of our commercial areas that are within 120 feet of residential.
Yes.
you
I mean,
know, the
it's
one right
gonna be
there
less
on
than
R 92 backs up to a residential district. The Casey's here in the middle of town backs up to a residential district, so.
I don't know we can solve the existing situation, but I think the one thing that really helps this is that whole maximum brightness level. So
Yeah.
the 5,000 daylight, 250 candles nighttime is a pretty good standard. That may help.
And maybe that's where we don't need to overthink it as much.
Yeah, and just if we can't fix that existing situation, well, not legally. I mean, I don't want to tell you about that. I like the creativity, but I'm still, your consultant's not recommending that. But yeah. Again, this is one of those areas of code that will evolve over time. I can absolutely see you revisiting this in a few years.
I'm gonna jump back on the pole sign wagon again, but, you know, we require if a building, tenant comes into an existing building, we're gonna talk about that tonight, right? I mean, in one instance, they are required to upgrade the facade standards for the building to meet current code. So I'm wondering why the pole sign is somehow differently treated than the exterior building facade. That we're gonna allow those poles to stay up for eternity, really. It doesn't matter who goes in and out, those things just stay forever.
But I think you're getting to more of the content of it, so again, you've always gotta think on signs, you're not really able to permit the content on the sign, so if there is a pole sign with a cabinet on it and that cabinet is the same size, never changes, and it's just that the message within that cabinet changes out every so often.
Right.
It's kind of difficult to say, okay, now at this standpoint, you've triggered the change on that. Now on new buildings or buildings, you know, redevelopment of sites, whatever that may be, where you're getting those facade standards in there, you know, there is something that is triggering a change to require the site plan at that standpoint.
Is that the way it's written? If the sign piece, it doesn't change size, it's okay? Cause that's what you're saying right now. And I didn't hear that before.
That is it exactly. You cannot change, in fact,
The frame has to
the
stay.
frame itself. You're
Yeah.
literally changing out the
Alright.
panels only,
Yep.
or the light bulbs, or maybe you're changing it.
Okay,
But you kind of bring up an interesting point. If they're doing such a level of site plan modification that it's triggering them to bring the facade and let's say the landscaping or the parking up to standard, that, depending on how we want to write it, could be a trigger to bring the signage up to standard.
right.
So I mean, that might be something to kind of think about. So in the usual situation, tenant changing a strip mall is not telling you to upgrade
Right.
facade. It's just we're changing who's in there. But if you're doing I was a Pizza Hut and now I'm gonna be an eye doctor and I'm totally redoing this and totally, well, maybe
Yeah.
that could be a trigger.
I'm
for the
tearing
sign.
down the building, I'm building a new one, but I'm gonna leave that pole sign up.
Well, it's, yeah, exactly. So I mean, that could be something that we could adjust.
Support that.
Yeah, I know, and I'm more or less thinking, I don't know, do we need to actually write anything in code, or is that just something that how we interpret our enforcement on site planning
Yeah,
standards?
they could-
That's why I need to go back and maybe read that little section again. Okay. It's like the major mod standard, major mod trigger. With your permission, if that would be, I just suggest, if that's something you're interested, that could be a part of your recommendation to, make sure the language says that we're triggering sign compliance at, say, major site plan modification.
That's a good way to move this along.
Just also give us direction on whether you want anything else changed on EMCs.
On what?
On the electronic message centers, sorry. No acronyms.
I think we
Say
can
AMC.
brightness for now and revisit it if we need to.
Set that at 3 seconds that we've said, or what was the time?
30-second
Yeah.
dwell time, so it can't change
Right.
every 30 seconds.
I've always thought they're dangerous when they're moving too much. People are just distracted driving.
You wanna see what the next,
Is that means it must flash a fixed message, it can't scroll?
Correct, so it's no animated graphics, no
And no
swipe,
scrolling.
change, roll,
Can't be
curve,
moved,
all that
can't
kind of
change.
stuff. It's
Okay.
boom, image, boom, image.
Yeah, okay.
But the image could be full color like the Red Robin.
Yeah,
And that could be a static image, and then 30 seconds later, it's their chicken sandwich.
try that.
It's new signs only anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Doesn't affect existing.
I'd like to make a motion.
Put that into right.
Yeah.
Is our recommendation, is our motion to make a recommendation to city council, the addition of the pole sign being removed with facade changes that would happen on a major site plan? My motion.
Any further discussion before we vote? All right, we'll do a roll call vote.
Jeremy?
Yes.
Sarah? Yes. Al?
Yes.
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Lynn?
Yes.
Next on the agenda, item 7B, consider request from Tim Portson on behalf of Downing Family Investments, Inc.
There's the part that's north of the golf course and then the part that's to the south. This preliminary plat touches on the area to the north, but they were calling about the area to the south, which doesn't have any proposed residential development. The applicant has submitted a plat of survey to divide this area from the area to the north, and is tentatively scheduled for the next Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. And that caller had indicated at that point they would submit public comments. So staff is currently recommending approval for the submitted.
Lisa. I don't have host ability. It's my name on the screen.
There it is.
Anybody have more? Yeah. I will get this plat loaded here on the screen for you. There we go.
Point of clarification. It says this is parcel 0662. On the map we received in our plat packet, the north piece and the south piece are both labeled 0663.
So,
We're talking about the north piece only?
you want to explain that? Well, what it is somehow when all this was divided up, when the golf course went in there some years ago, they split that golf course out of this original parcel. So that left a little triangular piece on the south side. So no, it is just the north side. They've also submitted a plat of survey that we will bring forward at your next commission meeting to split this off, that smaller piece on the south.
So that's what Emily was just explaining. That piece will come to us next month.
And then good thing is that the adjoining property owner to that piece is also the property owner of this one too. So in the end, it'll all.
So that's the proposal.
Yes, trying to kind of zoom in here a little bit and get it centered in for you there. In case you have any particular questions on it.
So there's a potential extension of that road, looks like, in the future with development.
To the north, yes. Yep.
Right now, the fire department has no issues with that being a big, long dead end, kind of.
Nope. They've reviewed it. We've got the temporary turnaround on there. So if they ever do have to get in there, they're able to get in there and get it,
They can go
back
back,
out. So
Which one is for the single family resident?
I think that's lot 9, right?
All the way to the
Correct,
north.
lot 9.
Yeah.
There?
All the way to the north,
Thank
there's
you.
like a, yeah. Does anyone in the audience have any comments or questions about this particular agenda item? And if so, if you could go up to the podium.
Paul Clausen, Civil Engineering Consultants, 2400 86th Street, Urbandale, Iowa. Here on behalf of Diligent Development, and happy to answer any questions, but Emily gave a pretty good spiel of what we're proposing here.
Video.
Anyone else? If you want to come up to the podium, that would be great, and give us your name and address, please, and then your question.
Karen Weinman, 822 Trail Ridge Road. My only question is, there are trees out in that area, so does this remove all those trees?
No, outlot, the large outlot Z is to remain. There's a large area of trees to remain there. Yeah. So, yeah.
Anyone else have questions or comments?
Is that a detention basin, water detention basin there?
Yeah, where you see right in this area here.
That will remain even though that's full of trees in there, because there's quite a bit of grading work that's happening there.
Say that again now?
That outlot Y, it appears has a lot of grading work to happen
Yeah.
to retain that water. I'm just wondering how well the woods will be preserved because of that.
Oh, Outlot Z is where most of the woods will be
Yeah,
preserved.
so this area right
Oh, I'm
here.
sorry.
Yeah.
So outlot Y is still kind of outside of the wooded area.
Correct. Well, it is wooded right now, but, I mean, we had to do the stormwater detention, but there is the, almost 4 acres of Outlot Z that's
I just want to
not
make
being
sure
disturbed. Yeah.
you understood that it's not all being preserved.
Correct. Yes, there will be tree removal, but over 4 acres will be preserved of wooded area.
That drainage basin will drain to that little stream.
Correct.
Would anyone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion. I recommend it be approved as submitted.
Second. Any further discussion before we vote? Not, if we could do roll call vote, please.
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Sarah? Yes. Al,
Yes.
Misty,
Yes.
Jeremy.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item, 7C, consider the request from Jason Ledden on behalf of Indianola Industrial Park LLC for recommendation of approval of a preliminary plat for Indianola Industrial Park 3.
This is a preliminary plat application for the Indianola Industrial Park 3, and it would allow for 3 industrial lots on land zoned M2 General Industrial if approved. The development stubs the road to the south to allow for a future road connection between East Iowa and East Hillcrest Avenue. A temporary turnaround is provided on the plat that the fire department had reviewed and approved. The future land use of this area is designated as industrial, calling for uses such as office, warehouse, manufacturing, and other industrial uses. Staff is recommending approval as submitted.
That property turns sideways.
Yes. Yeah, so Hillcrest would be, I could do it the other way, but just with how it fits in there, it's not gonna go. But yes, Hillcrest right here, north is this point right here. So this would be proposed 17th Street right in there, and then the cul-de-sac coming in there, which I believe we've called Orchard Place.
So they're gonna take 4 pieces of property and make them into 3. Correct?
And, you know, full disclosure on this one, the city's been working with the property owner on this one on various aspects. One of the things we had to do with lot 3 was create that large lot because we were trying to go through a process with IEDA to get this as a certified site. And that was one of their requests. There is opportunity to further divide lot 3 if we did have users come to the property owner and, you know, only want 5 acres or 2 acres or something like that. So there is opportunity for that. But for now, we wanted to stay pretty broad. I think the property owner does have defined users for lot 1 and 2 currently kind of in line. Lot 3, we just kind of show it as a mass of land. You know, we get a lot of inquiries from the Des Moines Partnership that request 30 acres of land, so we could have a bigger business come in there. But you know, if that doesn't come to fruition, we could also then further subdivide that through a plating process through the commission to get additional lots out of that.
It was a marketing strategy.
It leaves the door open for
Yeah.
now.
For sure. Any comments or questions from anyone in the audience in regards to this? Or do we have any comments or questions ourselves? We good? Would you like to make a motion?
I would.
Great.
I would like to move that we recommend to the city council the request be approved as submitted.
I'll second.
Any further discussion before we vote? Not, let's vote.
Al?
Yes.
Bob?
Yes.
Misty?
Yes.
Yes.
Sarah? Yes. Jeremy?
I recuse myself from this vote.
Okay. All right, next item is 7D. Consider the request from Becky Nickum for rezoning from Commercial Highway C2 zoning district to the single-family residential attached R2 zoning district for land located at 902 West 3rd Avenue.
So this is a rezoning request to rezone a parcel of land from the C2 Highway Commercial Zoning District to the R2 Single Family Residential Attached Zoning District. The property is currently addressed as 902 West 3rd Avenue and contains a single-family dwelling. The applicant is requesting the rezoning to reflect existing and historic uses of the property. So the property contains that single-family dwelling, which dates long before the construction of the existing house, which was built in 1978. There used to be a house long before then as well, I think somewhere in the 1950s. This property fronts West 3rd Avenue as opposed to the highway. The properties to the east and the south will also front along this road are zoned for the R2 Single Family Residential Attached Zoning District as well. There was a request for rezoning on the property that was approved in 1991 to rezone the same property from C2 to R3 single family and 2-family residential. But this rezoning was reverted back to C2 highway commercial when the current zoning map was amended and approved. Rezoning this property from C2 to R2 is consistent with the future land use of this area, which designates this parcel as low-density residential and reflects the existing land uses for the property. A rezoning sign was placed and mailings were sent out on October 26th. At the time of writing the report, I did receive one phone call inquiring about the request. It was just a property owner within 200 feet who was inquiring about the rezoning request and the rezoning process, but didn't leave any comments. Aside from that, staff is recommending approval for this request.
Is the property adjoining to the east on C2 too, or is it residential?
It used to be in that original rezoning request, but that was rezoned to R2 or R3 at that time, and then zoning map was adopted as R2. I don't know, it was maybe just like a minor blender or something.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what happened with this one, and I know the property owner came to us and said, hey, we have an ordinance from the 90s, 91 that showed this. When we adopted the new zoning map, when the new zoning code was approved a little over a year ago here, the existing zoning that we showed in our system showed this property as C2. The thing that we kind of struggled with was, well, was that ever changed from R3 to C2 some point between 91 and 2021? Without going back to the records, we don't know. And in the end, it really doesn't matter because we adopted a full new zoning map in 2021 that showed this as C2. So really, it is theoretically fixing an error that happened along the line somewhere and just going through the process to get that fixed and legal.
Is there anyone, would you like to come up and speak if you wouldn't mind approaching?
I live at the property at 902 West 3rd, and this came to light because we wanted to get re-siding on our house. And our current mortgage company won't re-side it, wouldn't give us the money because it's zoned commercial. There's some Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac law that if it would burn down or be damaged in a tornado, we couldn't rebuild it. And then I was like, well, if we ever want to do any future, we went to a local bank and the local bank knows the local ordinances because you guys told me there was one. But for future, like if we ever want to sell the house or something, we figured we probably should maybe get our house zoned residential. We lived there since 2000. So been there for a while, and I was gonna say, so I don't know if you have any other questions. The property next to us is commercial. It used to be Putney's, but now it's a sign place. The one on the other side of us, I think is actually a rental property, to tell you the truth, because there people come and go a lot. So.
That makes sense. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Charlie, I thought that we had eliminated the prohibiting a rebuild letter in those scenarios.
What we did, we changed the code to say that if the house is destroyed by essentially an act of God or an accident of some sort, that you can rebuild it in the same configuration as it stands today. However, if it's proven that the house is destroyed by arson, or if it's just the building becomes dilapidated due to the lack of maintenance by the property owner, then that clause does not take effect. So yes, we do allow them to be rebuilt, but there are conditions that would possibly not allow it to be rebuilt. Really, that has to be something that the owner forced on the property to destroy it.
I wonder if that designation makes it so from a secondary market point of view. But my understanding, because I've been a big, it's been very prohibitive for residences, the rebuild letter portion of the commercial zoning. I haven't heard of someone having the issue on the secondary market because of the zoning part, but still, I mean, there might be other elements of it. It is something that creates difficulty that people don't anticipate.
And if you recall, we looked through that, we looked through a lot of the other metro communities and some other communities in Iowa to see if anybody was making exceptions to it, and 95% of them were not making exceptions to that. So, I think that, the secondary market probably looks at it as says, well, most communities, there's no exception. So we're one of the few that have them.
But really separate from the fact that this one,
Yeah.
somewhere along the way, switched zoning.
Mhm. And even if that history had not happened, this is also not the first time that we've had a commercially zoned property come through and asked to be zoned residentially for reasons like that.
Exactly.
And really, what we have to look at is you've got adjacent zoning that is the same, it's not a spot zoning matter or anything like that. So even if there was not an error and there wasn't proof of a rezoning in 91, as staff, I don't think we would ever sit here and say, no, don't rezone this, because it still does make sense.
Would anyone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion that we recommend the request be approved as submitted.
Any further discussion before we vote? If we could do a vote, then that'd be great.
Misty,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Al,
Yes.
Sarah,
Yes.
Jeremy,
Yes.
Yes.
Jeremy, if you knew how large you were in this room, I wonder if you'd be the new person instead.
Still in Halloween?
I'll get them off the screen.
There we go. Item 7E, consider recommendation on a major site plan application for a drive-through restaurant at 102 North Jefferson Way.
This request is for a major site plan approval for a property located at 102 North Jefferson Way. The major site plan application proposes an additional approximately 19,000 square feet of impervious surface area to allow for a drive-through facility for new restaurant use. The site does contain an existing building which is currently occupied by Core Nutrition. A second tenant is proposed in the adjoining unit. One parking spot is required per every 150 square feet of ground floor area. A total of 19 parking spots would be required, however, and 15 are shown on the site plan. The site plan does not currently meet those minimum parking requirements. However, it's an existing site, and the site will have a drive-through facility that has the ability to stack 10 vehicles. Additionally, the parking lot is an interconnected parking lot which connects to a parking lot system to the north. The site does meet minimum open space requirements and a landscaping plan is provided. The site is deficient in landscaping requirements for those required in the parking lot setback. However, staff understands that this is an existing site. The building shows little to minor changes to the exterior facades of the building. Of the proposed work, the applicant has proposed repainting the existing metal fascia and adding additional doorway entries. The building doesn't meet the minimum requirements for building materials. However, staff feels that if the building's exterior were to be renovated in the future, that it could meet the minimum facade materials at that point. Lastly, the site does meet the minimum 20% glass fenestration requirements for the existing building. Staff is recommending approval.
Could you orient me on that?
Yep.
Where's the highway? Where's
Jefferson,
Salem?
Jefferson's right here and Salem's down here on the.
So you would come in from the west to this?
So I'll explain the site plan here as well as I can. So right now, there's currently a lot of open driveways within this site. The plan is to remove most of those. So right now along Jefferson Way, they've got a pretty lengthy open cut in that driveway right here. They would reduce all of that to just this area right here, which is just south of where the sign is for the church currently. And this would be the only driveway entrance into the site. And then ditto on the south side here, they're taking a lot of this out and pouring it back and then just having one access from Salem here into the site. And I think on the site plan, if I go a few more down, I thought there was a exhibit on here that showed the movement, the turning movements, but yeah, maybe I don't have that on this. Oh, right here, yep. So this kind of shows how vehicles can get into the site and out of the site, and the turning movements they would make within the site.
Basically gonna come in off Salem?
Salem and Jefferson.
Either one they could.
How far is it from the corner to the entrance on Salem?
Putting me on the spot here to find all of this.
60 feet.
Space between that fence and in between the church and
Just had it there. Hold on one second.
our large truck residence. I don't envision them making these.
I mean, there's a lot of traffic on
60,
East
70.
Salem.
Mhm.
I live on East Salem. It's the major route to the high school.
It's,
You come sit on my front porch at starting at 7 o'clock in the morning, you will be amazed.
it'd be about 103 feet back to the back of the building. So, I mean, it wouldn't operate terribly differently than the way when people come in from the side street to go into Dairy Queen, that they can come in from Jefferson and then they can turn as well.
Very similar.
Pretty much equivalent
And they'll go back out on,
on Jefferson
They can
or.
do either one.
Because if they wanted to, they could go back through the lot and get out.
So that'd be a pain.
Well, unless you just don't want to deal with turning left on the highway, you better come out and go.
I think when you look at it, the natural traffic flow would be coming in Salem, going up. If you're going through the drive-through, going up to the drive-through and then exiting out onto Jefferson. It's probably gonna be how most people do it, but again, the opportunity is there too.
but they could go through the church parking lot? There's no way to.
Yeah, they could.
There's no way to control whether they drive through the church parking lot or not.
No.
Interconnections allowed through our ordinance. Our ordinance promotes it in a lot of areas because actually it takes it, we typically have parking lot setbacks that are 10 feet in commercial zoning districts. If you interconnect, we take away that setback because again, that promotes just the connections for private property, which tend to take traffic off the public roads, and that's overall usually a better scenario.
How much space is between the fence and the building for that traffic flow?
Fence in the building, say that,
So there's the fence on the resident.
Yep.
That separates the residential.
and then to the building,
Well, yeah, for the traffic flow essentially. It just looks really tight.
from the fence to where the drive-through lane is here.
Mhm.
Yeah,
You talk about on the north?
Oh. I would say you're probably somewhere around 7 feet from the fence to where that curb is for the drive-through lane.
Have to be a minimum of 5, don't they?
Yes.
And then same on the north, same question on the north side, between the church and basically the church's landscape.
There's no setback on that though, because they have that interconnection to the north here. That side setback goes away.
So you're gonna order at the south end and pick up at the north end?
No, the menu board, if you're looking here on the screen, is right here.
Okay,
So that would be where you'd order, and then the drive-through window, I believe, is, yeah, right here.
and you can put 10 vehicles between Salem and the ordering board?
No, it's not between the ordering boards, it's between the drive-through window and then the end of the drive-through lane.
How
we
far,
consider
how many
stacking.
vehicles can you put from the ordering board to Salem?
Down to Salem, I don't know. I mean, they show the vehicle stacking from the drive-through window down to the beginning of the drive-through lane. Now, obviously, you could get more vehicles into this parking lot through there from that drive-through window, but they're showing from the end of that drive-through lane to the message board, 3 vehicles.
What's Dairy Queen's capability?
I was gonna ask the same thing.
Because I've seen them back clear up to the tax lane.
Same
Still
deal.
here.
No, this is actually a better scenario than Dairy Queen because you're not parked through the middle of the parking lot.
That's true.
And
You're not congesting traffic of not being able to get out.
on this one, you nearly provide 360 access around the building too, which Dairy Queen.
It's not.
Now, the problem would be that if they back up to, where you come out of Salem, then it's a roadblock.
Yes.
Are there parking spaces on the south side too? So
Yeah.
when you're coming in off Salem, so there's where people will block parked cars in.
Right.
Yes,
Fair enough.
yes.
Well,
have,
yes
I
and
mean-
no, I mean, it looks like on the
Yeah, it will.
west, 2 to 3 parking spots maybe. Other than that, you have
And
spots that you can go back out
Depends how
to
far
the.
it backs up.
we have.
I should say east.
We have minimum stacking requirements in our zoning code, and they meet our minimum stacking requirements. The one thing about Dairy Queen, is, tonight, Dairy Queen's not gonna have a problem
Right.
because it's freezing outside. In the summer is when we usually have the problem, when more people are going for ice cream, so it's, yeah, yes. What's that?
Or after a school concert.
Yes.
Yeah.
But when Dairy Queen was, sorry, when Dairy Queen was put in, I mean, again, we didn't have those minimum stacking standards, so that was one thing that was not reviewed.
There was one piece that Emily talked about, and that was the parking spaces. So they're foreshort.
So they had originally proposed to make up for those for this proposed patio expansion area here. They showed kind of some stacked parking in there for their employees. In the end, they're short on our minimum parking requirements. One of the things that we always have to look at from staff standpoint is that, okay, we're dealing with an existing site here. Really, there is absolutely no room to put additional parking on this site. At the same time, I try not to put as much of an emphasis on parking as maybe some people would, just because it's more pavement, leads to, more stormwater runoff and all of that. The other thing to look at here is we do have a little bit of potential overflow parking if the, the property owner ever did get in an agreement with the church there, where, that church is being used, obviously, a little off hours from what the restaurant would be. So if we ever did run into a situation where this parking lot filled up, we do have areas for that. We also do have a lot across the street that is a public lot as well too, so.
Oh,
We need to post a sign saying public parking.
We do have that in our city lot here, yes.
sorry, I said first.
So, and then one point I'll bring up is just seeing the Charlotte's Chicken up in Johnston. That was my question, is if the church would need to give a right of way to parking. Because at lunchtime, I know that there in Johnston, there's a Casey's next door. And the influx of people at that time, I've heard the Casey's employees go, we need to go move these people because they're inhibiting our business.
How lucky we have such a popular restaurant coming to town.
Right.
Yeah,
It's something to think about.
it's something definitely that if it does become an issue, I think that's something where that, the property owner would have to work with that property owner and work through those details. And, realistically, I should say realistically, what would happen is, obviously you get the overflow going in there. If the church were to say, hey, like, hold on a second, we don't want this happening, then at that point, that church can take care of their property, or deal with the property owner and get some sort of lease agreement for those spots during that time, so.
At that point, there's also parking on both sides of Salem, isn't there? Because Salem's extra wide right there, especially to the south side.
All things that we kind of factored in when we looked at that. Yes, we're 4 short, but, realistically, there is additional parking spaces within a pretty close proximity on this one where we felt comfortable enough going with what is proposed.
The reason I brought it up is because there are 2 businesses sharing that building. And to be fair for the other business, that is why I wanted to talk about parking specifically.
Are those parking spaces on the west side of the building? What are those like?
Yes.
Yes,
Are there
right
3
here.
or 4 there? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so you got the handicap spot here with the ADA ramp, this, and then our code also says that, we have to have curb landscape islands now on the end of parking, so they added those in. That was one thing we discussed, is we could take those out, put a few more parking spots in. From an aesthetic standpoint and just management and how the site looks, we felt that actually having the curb landscape was better than having more parking spaces.
So I'm reading this correctly, and I'm not sure I am because I thought I heard something different. Are they required to bring up the building to standards?
The code says, yes, on a major site plan, obviously you have to meet every aspect of the code. And again, just with the existing site and how we dealt with this, there was a lot of kind of, I think give and take during the review process where they are making improvements to the facade. They're not getting all the way there on what our facade requirements are. So, again, they're adding the trees in, they're adding the curb landscapes in, some of that stuff. They're meeting a lot of the aspects of the code. Really, from our standpoint, it was, okay, we'll get as close as we can here on this building, but they're not bringing it fully up to what the code says.
Are they really doing anything?
There was a few things that they did, yeah. I mean, there was some paint that they added to it, obviously, to kind of freshen that up. And I think the area on the top, I can't think what that's called. Not bad, but yeah, they did a little bit of work on that as well too.
Versus the alternative of having repeated temporary campaign offices or,
You don't like those?
And there was a lot of other things here too, if we want to get into the actual stormwater management on this site, there was a lot of discussion on that. Currently, this site is, as it currently operates today, it is dumping water onto the public right of way in a lot of areas. So we actually got them to put a stormwater system within this site, to pipe it, connect to a storm sewer to try to control that a little bit as well too. So there was just, again, there was a lot of things that we tried to kind of manage on this one and negotiate, I think, with the property owner to get to where we're at on this one.
Is that what the digging was in the back side there to connect?
I know on some of this, once we got to where staff had this, we said from staff standpoint, okay, we're good to move to the planning commission. There was some concrete work that I know they wanted to get started before they had full approval at their own risk, just because we're obviously running up to that time of year where it gets really hard to put concrete in. So they're aware of that. And they're kind of doing the proceed at your own risk thing in case anything changes on that. Yeah, step one, I think they're digging that storm sewer in there right now. I believe they started that today, and they might have done a little bit of driveway work as well.
The noon traffic will increase on East Salem from the high school to this place for a drive-in lunch. No question.
So as you are blocking off along Jefferson, that entrance there, there's no place for any additional parking. Since you're blocking off an entrance, there's no way to put in any extra parking there?
You're talking like along the road here?
Yep, along there, any parallel parking or anything? Or on that south, west corner?
You could possibly get parallel parking in there because from parking stall to the curb, you've got, it looks like about 36 feet there. So you know, theoretically, you could still get about a 10-foot parallel parking spot in there width-wise. I don't know how long that is. I don't know how many you could actually add in. I would guess maybe 3 or something like that, that you could put in there. They're not showing it here as marked spots. You know, that could be something that naturally
Say,
happens
what
too.
would be the negative?
And I know, what is it? I know where UPS and Great Clips is, and what is it, Maurice's, and that they do something similar to that as well too, so. I mean, it's probably just adding in pavement markings.
Yeah, just put some striping in. I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, we can definitely have them take a look at that. There is enough room there, so that's, I guess, one thing we probably never considered, so.
Brilliant ideas come out of this meeting.
That's why we bring it to you guys. There's some things that we miss, so.
Anybody?
You know what, fully blocked by the chair. I have no
yeah.
idea there was
Guy
something
back
back there.
No,
Would anyone
I'm-
in the audience like to just,
I'll
to
just
ask
stand
any
up here.
questions?
I'm
I-
just with Cooper Crawford, so I don't know where we're at, I guess, with the 1818 storage facility.
Yeah, that's not on this agenda.
Okay, I wasn't sure if we could add it or not.
Uh,
But
Oh,
It's
yeah.
gotta go till next month.
Yep.
You waited a long time to ask that question.
I apologize, yeah.
Entertain you.
Good to learn.
Yeah, you can give us a call tomorrow. We can talk about that one a little bit more.
Would anyone like to make a motion?
You wanna make a motion since you were bringing up that? It's up to you, but you don't have to.
Can we make a motion, you know, I guess to have the conversation with the developer regarding the additional parking spaces, but also, I guess not, you know, as a preference, but not necessarily make it a condition of, like alternative one approval. Is that possible to do?
And what I would say, Jeremy, I think what you could do is you could make it a recommendation. We could discuss, again, it's, your recommendation is just that, a recommendation. If the applicant wants to work against that, we can have that discussion with the council at that point.
Yeah, I guess I just would, just so I guess it doesn't have to come back to planning and zoning again.
Wouldn't have to.
Yeah. I'll move to make a motion to move towards alternative one with the preference or with the additional recommendation of the parking spaces, but not as a condition of approval. A requirement of condition approval. I don't know how you want to word it, but
We get the gist.
yeah.
Additional approval based on a free lunch for every.
He might come find you.
That's illegal.
Second the motion.
Any further discussion before we vote? Let's vote.
Sarah? Yes. Jeremy?
Yes.
Yes.
Al?
Yes.
Misty?
Yes,
He doesn't want more traffic.
Lynn?
Yes,
right.
he doesn't want more traffic, but he does.
Yeah, he wants the chicken.
All right, so item F, discussion regarding future planning and zoning meeting schedule for 2023.
Yeah, so one thing we wanted to bring forward to the commission, I'll tell you this year with our new zoning code and with the frequency of site plans that we're reviewing and bringing to the commission, we've been getting a lot of feedback, I think, from the development community on how items on site plans are getting stretched out more than they used to just because of the approval process that we have to go through. One of the things that I think a lot of communities do to conquer this based off the level of development activity they have is they have 2 planning and zoning commission meetings a month. Emily put together a good memo that kind of shows what most of the cities in the metro do as far as that. And I think from our standpoint, we've talked kind of with city management on this, as well as a few council members. And I think there is a want to try to move to 2 planning and zoning commissions per month for next year and then possibly into the foreseeable future. One thing I think I will add to that is, yes, that's another commitment from all of you each month. Please trust your staff to know that we are gonna do whatever we can to try to get everything on just one meeting. You know, there's gonna be items that are not gonna be that important, that they don't need to come forward. And if we just have, for example, one plat of survey on a piece of ground outside the county that has to be on this one meeting, you know, we're gonna see if we can push that to another meeting and combine them and not have these second meetings. But, you know, the Charlotte's Kitchen one was a really good example. They missed the last planning and zoning commission meeting. They really wanted to get on that one, but we still weren't to a level through staff review where we were comfortable bringing that forward to the planning and zoning commission because there were still a few deficiencies in their site plan. So, you know, had they been allotted that opportunity, they could have got another planning and zoning commission maybe at the end of October, and they could have moved forward maybe a little bit sooner with some of the improvements that they want to do on site. So I think we just wanted to kind of ask for the planning and zoning commission's feedback on that and see if you were open to possibly having 2 meetings per month. I would envision we still keep the second Tuesday and then maybe do the 4th Tuesday, as I've kind of played that out a little bit on how the timelines all match up with getting to council meetings. That seems to be the best. Although for me, the 4th week of the month has always been my vacation month just because I had no meetings, so. Standpoint, but we'll be okay on that.
It is nice with the flexibility of being able to attend via Zoom as well.
Yes.
Now, will our per diem that we receive, will it extend to? Okay.
Actually, no, I guess, yeah, it'll multiply by 10. Maybe even 100. 100 times 0 is still.
I would just like to say, like, you know, just echoing what you said, Charlie, like the issues that even like our small businesses face in some of these things, especially during this time, is waiting on council approval for certain things and not moving forward. So I know we always really appreciate in my professional life when we can get to these things a little sooner and earlier. So I'm all for, you know, another meeting on these things, especially if it helps our development community in Indianola. And then secondly, like what you said too, I'll leave it to you guys, and I know you guys do a great job with it, but if you can get it in on one meeting and it's not a pressing item within the month, I would definitely welcome that as well. Less meetings, the better, but when they're needed, I think that we should be available to our development community to do that.
Yeah, and that's, Jeremy, that's a really good point, and I think I failed to hit on that one too, and that really this is for the development community. And, you know, City of Indianola, I don't want to say that we're at a disadvantage in some areas, but realistically, kind of with location, size of town, sometimes we are at a disadvantage. So the more we can do for the development community, the more we can do to make the process that much easier. I think the reward there for us.
I think it's a positive step in Indianola has definitely had a reputation as being difficult. That's been around for a very long time, and there's been such great strides. And I think this would be a further example of that.
If we're gonna do this, I hope we don't start playing hopscotch between the 2nd and the 4th, and like in 1 month have it the 2nd, and then another month have it the 4th, 3rd Tuesday, and it makes it very difficult to plan one's life when you start doing that. Since you're already gonna impact 2 weeks out of the month.
Council meetings fit well in between the second.
Yeah, councils are 1st and 3rd Mondays, so actually it works pretty well. At one point, we thought about maybe moving the week of the month that it did it, but then that just delayed the time between this meeting and the council meeting. So right now, it gets a little bit stressful for us sometimes because if we have this meeting, you know, for example, all this stuff that goes to the next council, we've got to have that finalized by Friday to get on the meeting because our agendas have to be finalized really about Monday or Tuesday next week, and then it gets published next Friday. So we have a quick turnaround, but it works right now. When you take a step back and you think you're really trying to help the development community here, if we were to change the dates, really all we're doing is extending timelines at that standpoint. Now, I would be open to possibly changing the day of the week if that was easier on people. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, work, in all those scenarios, but I think we were just trying to kind of stay status quo on Tuesday.
So really like what you said is your first Tuesday is gonna be more over constant. And the fourth, or be fourth Tuesday would be.
I think if that's
Variable.
kind of what if that's the commission's wish, I think we can try to kind of, and we'll put that, somehow we'll put that into a schedule to say this is kind of the preferred meeting, but this is the alternative meeting or something to that effect. I don't know how we'll word that, but
We could give like special terms to applicants who agree to do the first Tuesday of the month versus the third. There'll be an additional
It'll be
fee.
easier on you if you come the second.
There'll be an additional application fee or a rush fee.
and again, we'll play with it. We'll see how it works. It's gonna take a change in your rules of procedure, because right now your rules of procedure say the 1 month, and I have not even looked at the code. I don't think the code spells out how many meetings you have to have a month. I hope to gosh it does not, but let me look here really
And a
quick.
quorum of, 5 of 8 people
Yes.
gives us that flexibility a little bit too.
Yeah, thankfully the ordinance does not spell out how often you meet and when you meet, so there would be no change to that. But again, we can try it out for a year, and in the end, if we say, at this point next year, this isn't working out, we want to go back, we can do that as well too, so.
So is this something you're looking for a motion on?
Nope, I don't need a motion. I think seems like I've got a concurrence here. Nobody's objecting too hard. What we'll do is we'll put this together for your next meeting. Obviously, we'll have you adopt your 2023 schedule at your next meeting. And that schedule will reflect the 2 meetings a month.
Right. So the final item is the building permit report.
Here, so building permit report, same as I think we've been saying every year, our valuation overall is up at a good point. We're on par for about that 200 building permits per year threshold. Single family is just slowed down. The market has slowed single family new construction down, I think, quite a bit. We get the Home Builders Association report for the entire metro area. We are not the only community dealing with that, so that is what it is. We're still, from our standpoint, working with residential developers to try to encourage them to purchase land and develop lots down here. We've still got a few that we know are in the works right now. Obviously, you just reviewed a plat tonight, but I think overall, some of the builders we've talked to, they're just taking a step back for a little bit and seeing what goes on with the market, so.
All right. Would someone like to make a motion to adjourn?
I would.
Second. It's so helpful tonight. All in favor?
Aye.
Have a great evening.
You too.
Charlie, just for my own personal information, is the new sewage treatment plant functional yet? Or?
It's not fully functional. They're still, and you guys might know more about this than I do, I guess, because you've been working on the technology,
They're
but
using both of them now?
yeah, they're pumping.
Flowing to it right now.
Yeah, they're getting the, what is it, the bacteria, not they're trying to kind of get them fully functional and all of that stuff. So yeah, it's in transition right now.
Okay, thank you. Just curious.
But I believe, was it next week at some point they want to cut that off?
Well, actually, they were possibly doing some of it this Friday, but now they're pushing that to